everyone, and welcome back to another Marilyn Manson update video. Buckle up because this is probably going to be a long one. Luckily though, this one should not be too heavy in the sense of going over details of alleged abuse or violence or things like that. But it will be a heavy conversation regardless, because today we need to talk about the declaration that was recently filed by Ashley Morgan Smithline in Marilyn Manson's case against Evan Rachel Wood and Ilma Gore, and we will also be talking about their legal team's response as well. So if you don't already know, because I don't think I've covered this directly on my YouTube channel yet, Marilyn Manson is suing Evan Rachel Wood and Ilma Gore for a lot of different things, but namely for defamation. And that case really hinges on this idea that Evan Rachel Wood and Ilma Gore worked together to create a conspiracy against him by contacting exes and former employees, people that maybe would have held a grudge against him, contacted them and basically would have talked them into or convinced them through some other method to lie on their behalf to create a narrative that Marilyn Manson was an abuser when he really wasn't, in order to defame him, cancel him, so on and so forth. And it's actually sort of interesting because this idea that there's the reason why so many people talked out at the same time was because there's a conspiracy and this is all planned by Evan Rachel Wood and Ilma Gore, and it's all just a really calculated thing. That was something that was really espoused even before this lawsuit happened by the more, let's say, pro-Manson side of the internet. And it certainly is a theory. That is what I will say about that. But one of these people that was part of this alleged conspiracy, according to the pro-Manson side of the internet, was somebody by the name of Ashley Morgan Smithline. And we have covered her allegations before extensively on this channel. She has done a whole spread with People magazine. And her story, at least in terms of the story that first came out, was very similar to Evan's, right? That he would tie her up, he would beat her, he would lock her in rooms, he was verbally abusive, physically abusive, that he even used Nazi memorabilia on her. And there were a lot of similarities between their two stories. And so because of that, and because of the fact that she spoke out 2 years ago, it came as a bit of a shock when at the end of February, she filed a declaration in Marilyn Manson's case against Evan and Ilma in Manson's favor. Ashley Morgan Smithline, who previously sued Marilyn Manson for sexual assault, recanted her previous allegations and now claims that actress Evan Rachel Wood and others, quote, manipulated her into speaking out against the singer. The about-face comes in a declaration submitted by Manson's lawyer, Howard King, in a suit the musician, whose real name is Brian Warner, filed against Wood and Wood's friend, Ilma Gore. Quote, I succumbed to pressure from Evan Rachel Wood and her associates to make accusations of rape and assault against Mr. Warner that were not true, Smithline now claims. Smithline sued Warner in 2021, alleging sexual assault, sexual battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, human trafficking, and unlawful imprisonment, among other allegations. Warner denied the accusations. The suit was dismissed last month. A spokesperson for Wood vehemently denies Smithline's claims to Rolling Stone. Quote, Evan never pressured or manipulated Ashley, the rep says. It was Ashley who first contacted Evan about the abuse she had suffered. It's unfortunate that the harassment and threats Ashley received after filing her federal lawsuit appear to have pressured her to change her testimony. In her statement, Smithline further claimed that Ellwanger, who represented her in her suit against Warner, did not allow her to review the filing before he submitted it. Quote, my response is constrained by ethical obligations regarding client confidentiality, even to a former client, Ellwanger tells Rolling Stone in response to Smithline's accusations against him. But what I can say is that the specific allegations regarding my representation of Miss Smithline are categorically and verifiably false. Of course, the second this dropped, the pro-Manson side of the internet absolutely exploded. You would have thought it was VE Day, the way these people were celebrating online. I even got a flood of comments on both my Marilyn Manson videos and on completely unrelated videos demanding that I delete my videos, that I make a formal apology, that I retract all of my statements, and that I should be prepared to be sued by Marilyn Manson for defamation myself. That is a little wild, but this was really the golden moment that they were waiting for, right? Because as I said, the pro-Manson side of the internet invented the idea of this conspiracy well before there was even a lawsuit. So to have a declaration that seemingly supports that point is a huge, big, golden moment for them. They were waiting for this to just prove that Evan Rachel Wood is a big lying liar who lies. She can't be believed, and because she can't be believed and maybe one person lied, that means we can entirely discredit every single other allegation or accusation, and in fact, we probably should. I mean, really, you would be forgiven for assuming he just won his defamation case from the way people were acting online. And reading through that and reading through the headlines surrounding this declaration, it would be understandable if you made some assumptions based off of that, because certainly lines like Evan Rachel Wood manipulated her into lying would bring to mind maybe some of the key points that these people on the internet have been spreading around, right? The forged/fake FBI letter that was supposedly used to help recruit people and manipulate them into lying. Or maybe things like promising certain monetary gain, or helping her with her career, or even just plain old revenge, right? And probably something more direct, right? Like saying, you should lie and it's okay if you do, white lies are fine because it's all about serving the greater good. Like at bare minimum, you might expect that, you know? But as always, it is important to read beyond just the headlines, so we're going to read every single line of this declaration, break it down, and go over what I think's happening here. I, Ashley Lindsay Morgan Smithline, declares as follows. In November 2010, I had a brief consensual sexual relationship with Brian Warner, also known as Marilyn Manson, during a trip I took to Los Angeles from Thailand, where I was living. 10 years later, I succumbed to pressure from Evan Rachel Wood and her associates to make accusations of rape and assault against Mr. Warner that were not true. In 2020, I was contacted by either Ashley Walters or Ilma Gore to participate in a group meeting of women who, they said, had relationships or experiences with Mr. Warner. I knew Miss Walters from my trip to Los Angeles in 2010. She was Mr. Warner's assistant and had arranged my travel. I also spent time with her during the trip. Ultimately, I participated in at least one such group call and a meeting that was filmed in October 2020, which I only later learned was her Phoenix Rising. From this time in 2020 through June 2021, I had many communications with Miss Wood. During my conversation with Miss Wood, she described acts allegedly committed by Mr. Warner against Miss Wood and other supposed victims and asked me whether the same things happened to me. I remember she asked me whether I had been, among other things, whipped, chained, tied up, branded/cut, assaulted while sleeping, beaten, or She said all of these things happened to Miss Wood and others, and that when Miss Wood was with Mr. Warner, every moment was a moment of survival. When I said, no, this did not happen to me and this was not my experience, I recall being told by Miss Wood that just because I could not remember did not necessarily mean that it did not happen. While at first I knew Mr. Warner did not do these things to me, I began to question whether he actually did. On numerous occasions, I was told by Miss Wood, Esme Bianco, and others that these things happened to Miss Wood and Miss Bianco, asked whether the same things happened to me, and told I may just be misremembering what happened, repressing my memories of what happened, or that my memories had not yet surfaced, which they said happened to people against whom these acts were perpetrated. I was asked whether I was repressing memories to just get through day-to-day life, and whether it was easier just to not think about what actually happened than accept reality. They also said it was important for people to come forward so that no one else gets hurt. I also recall that in one of the group meetings I attended with Miss Wood and Miss Gore said they could arrange security for anyone who felt in danger from Mr. Warner. I recall that Miss Bianco said during this discussion that private investigators had been parked outside of her house and probably were parked outside of mine. I also had separate conversations with Miss Bianco during this time period in which she told me her relationship with Mr. Warner was similar to that described by Miss Wood. She insisted that I was repressing memories like she and other supposed victims and Mr. Warner had done. Eventually, I started to believe that what I was repeatedly told happened to Miss Wood and Miss Bianco also happened to me. In or around January 2021, I attended a call on which Miss Wood said that on a certain day she would post to her social media naming Mr. Warner as her abuser, and that we all should do the same on or around the same day. I discussed with Miss Gore making such a statement on my Instagram page accusing Mr. Warner of abuse. Miss Gore drafted the statement and I gave her my password to post it. The narrative ultimately posted to my account on or around February 1st, 2021 contained untrue statements about Mr. Warner, including that there was violence and non-consensual sexual activity in our brief relationship, and that I had repressed memories of the same. As another example, there was no branding or cutting experienced during the brief relationship and certainly no Marilyn Manson initials carved on my body. On June 29, 2021, a complaint was filed in the lawsuit Ashley Lindsay Morgan Smithline versus Brian Warner et al. Ms. Bianco told me that Mr. Ellwanger was her lawyer and that I should use him. Mr. Ellwanger did not review the contents of the complaint with me before filing it and did not send me a draft of the complaint to approve before filing it. The complaint contained untrue statements about Mr. Warner, including that there was violence and non-consensual sexual activity in our brief relationship, and that I had repressed memories of the same meeting I had with Miss Wood, Miss Gore, and others in 2020. Leading up to the filing of the complaint, I felt pressured by Mr. Ellwanger to go on a press tour, which included an interview on The View and an interview and photo shoot with People magazine. I was very uncomfortable doing this press, but felt pressured to do it. After the lawsuit was filed on my behalf, I fired Mr. Ellwanger, and the case was dismissed. I never received any money from Mr. Warner, and I'm not seeking any money from him. I have no intention of refiling any lawsuit against Mr. Warner. I never intended to pursue criminal charges against Mr. Warner and have no intention now of ever pursuing criminal charges, as Mr. Warner did not ever assault or abuse me. Looking back, I felt I was manipulated by Miss Wood, Miss Gore, Miss Bianco, and Mr. Ellwanger to spread publicly false accusations of abuse against Mr. Warner. I declare under penalty of perjury, under the laws of the state of California, that the foregoing is true and correct. Executed this 19th day, February 2023 at Los Angeles County, California. I think what initially really struck me about this is how there is no mention of any of the smoking gun elements that Marilyn Manson has made a cornerstone of his defamation case. There is no mention of the forged FBI letter in this that was supposedly used to recruit and manipulate people. There was no mention of the coaching checklist or the abuse checklist that supposedly was also used to manipulate people. No mention of that whatsoever. There was no mention of money or bribery or helping her with her modeling career or threats, anything like that at all. And the one thing that they do say in this, allegedly, is that it's important to speak out so other people don't get hurt. Yeah, that really sounds like quite the conspiracy to me, a group of women talking privately about how important it is to speak up when you get abused to prevent other people from being abused. I'm sorry, I don't see that as supporting the conspiracy theory the way that other people seem to think that it supports it, at least on those items. But you know what, let's talk about the manipulation aspect of this, because I do think, yes, there is absolutely a chance that when you are in a high pressure social scenario, you might feel pressured in turn to go along with what the group is saying. If you are in a survivors group and everyone is sharing their horrible stories, you might feel like, gosh, well, that didn't happen to me, so I guess I better make something up to fit in. That would be awful. I don't think it's likely, but it is technically a possibility that that could happen. But also, this talk of repressed memories or ignoring thoughts in order to get through day-to-day life, it is a well-known fact that severe mental health issues and trauma will absolutely wreck your memory and make it difficult to remember events accurately. I mean, gosh, even here on YouTube just a couple days ago, there was an interview with a very mainstream creator named Tana Mojo who was recalling her traumatic childhood and how as a result of that, she has a shit memory and she constantly has to be fact-checked by people around her because her memory is either non-existent, very fuzzy, or super unreliable. So yeah, trauma does impact your memory. And besides that, there's also the well-documented hard drug and alcohol use that Marilyn Manson likes to partake in, and that he allegedly also did with the people that he was sleeping with and or abusing. And that definitely will impact your memory formation as well as your memory recall. So yeah, it sounds like there might be a lot of confounding variables here. We're having a conversation about, you might not remember everything, your memory might be fuzzy, you might be kind of not wanting to think about those memories. That to me all sounds like a perfectly normal conversation to have. Now, if the details here were a little bit different, maybe it was more like, you remember being hit in the face with a baseball bat by him, right? You remember him branding you with a Nazi knife, right? Like if it was coaching for specific memories to come out and saying you should remember this particular thing. Why don't you remember this particular thing? We know you experienced this, but you're saying you didn't. If it was more along those lines, that would raise more red flags to me. But as far as I can tell from this declaration, it wasn't like specific things. It was like, hey, this is what we experience, and it's okay if you're having trouble remembering the same thing. And this is where I think the declaration starts to fall apart, at least from the evidence it provides, which is nothing except her written declaration. There's no text messages, no screenshots, no photos, no anything, no emails, just her written word, which, it is a sworn declaration, so that does count for something in my book personally. But the details in it don't necessarily match up with reality, and there is little to no explanation for why that is. Like the People magazine shoot that she was on, there was a whole cover photo of her showing off scars on her body that did roughly look like an M and an M. And there is no alternative explanation for this being offered. And so, of course, the mind goes to, okay, well then, how else are those scars there? Because I think it's very unlikely that they are special effects makeup, because how in the world would People magazine editors and photographers not notice that? And if they did, wouldn't that mean People magazine is part of the conspiracy on this? But to me, and I am something of an expert on scars at this point, I have scars all over the place on my body. To me, these look like genuine, real, actual scars. One of them even looks like it keloided a little bit. That is not like a pretty typical fake scar you would give yourself to like look dramatic on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. They seem like pretty genuine scars, but if they're not from Marilyn Manson, when are they from? Are they self-inflicted? When did that happen? Were they consensual in nature? Is it drawn on with freaking white Sharpie? Like, what else could be causing this? Because I have trouble believing, because of the location on the body, that it came from something like a knife accident in a kitchen. And we are just kind of left to our own imaginations to envision why else those marks would be there. It's just that, like, the scars didn't happen, I wasn't cut, that's not true, and ignore the thing I did on People magazine. Seems a little bit strange to me personally. Then there's the timeline for all of this. So in Ashley Morgan Smithline's declaration, she says that either Ilma Gore or Ashley Walters reached out to her first in 2020. However, I can kind of see that working on the basis of, okay, Ashley Walters was Marilyn Manson's assistant at that time. She maybe would have remembered Ashley Smithline and would have known to reach out and contact her. But I don't necessarily think that that is the full story based on some other public postings we have going back before 2020. And Evan Rachel Wood references this in her response to this declaration, where she brings up the fact that in 2019, Ashley Morgan Smithline commented on one of her posts talking about her abuse, including details of things that were not yet public about her abuse, supposedly from Marilyn Manson, things that had not been disclosed in the public, because remember, back in 2019, no one had named Marilyn Manson as their abuser yet. That was still on the hush-hush. So for Ashley Morgan Smithline to come in and leave detailed comments about being locked in a ballet studio and things about the rules of attraction, things that no one else would have known about unless she had direct contact with Marilyn Manson, That seems a little bit odd. But not only that, in 2019, around this same time, she made her own Instagram post where she said the following: "He stole what art meant for me. He stole every dream I'd ever had." If this wasn't about Marilyn Manson, then who was it about? But again, no reference, no explanation is yet made for these 2019 comments and for this 2019 post. And in this response to the declaration by Evan Rachel Wood, she shares a lot of DMs and text messages from Ashley Morgan Smithline and between the two of them. Now, this is not a complete transcript of all of their text messages. This is all still very suspect until this gets verified, and unless it gets verified by the court, because as we all know, DMs, text messages, very, very easy to fake and doctor if you want to, if they're not looked into in a lot of detail. But throughout all of these text messages, over and over and over again, you get a particular picture of how Ashley would talk about her abuse. That it wasn't like this thing where it was like, oh, I don't really know what happened to me, I'm kind of confused. That no, she says repeatedly that she was abused, that she's been believing she's been abused since before meeting or talking to any of these people in person, and that in fact her main struggle was not like, oh, I'm being made to lie, but that like she was getting horrific amounts of online harassment because she spoke out against Marilyn Manson and ultimately ended up suing him. That was the problem she was having. That was what she was wrestling with. And anyone who is familiar with the coverage of this case knows this. People were ruthless against Ashley Smithline. I don't know if it was because people were thinking, oh, she's the weak link, let's go after her. But I kind of get that sense. There were all kinds of just mean-spirited memes about her, saying that she looked high, she looked crazy, she looked like, you know, just she had all this plastic surgery, she was ugly, like just needling her about every possible thing. They shared photos of her banged up face and then went, looks like she just had some more plastic surgery. Looks like she had some injections. Like, I don't know any plastic surgeon that would have somebody come out of the office looking like that, but all right. Like, it was just endless online harassment. Even when you go to her conversations with People Magazine, with The View, you go to those videos right now, and before this, months ago when they first came out, they were dislike bombed. They are full to the brim with hateful comments, saying the same stuff, harassing her, calling her crazy, calling her unbelievable, defending Marilyn Manson, calling her a liar. And just imagine having that everywhere you go on social media, every single day for 2 years. That is going to mentally impact you. And if it doesn't, frankly, I don't believe you because you haven't experienced it before. But before we go into my theories about what happened here, I do want to kind of call out a few elements of the declaration that I'm not really able to fully address or talk about too much. One of which would be that Ilma Gore allegedly wrote and then put out the statement that was put on Ashley's Instagram page for her on her behalf. No way to know if that's true or not. Not really sure what to make of that. I am sure at some point that could be provable in court, but I'm not really sure how they would do that if it was maybe logged into somebody else's phone. I don't know how they would figure that part out, but you know, that's not really that important to me. There is also Ashley saying that she was made really uncomfortable and didn't enjoy going on the press tour. Also believable. However, we will talk in a moment about how potentially the press tour and getting, you know, in the spotlight and talking about this was not solely her lawyer's idea. Again, we'll talk about it. And then the big one, which is that her lawyer supposedly filed the complaint against Marilyn Manson without her input, and it had a lot of falsities in it, and that wasn't something that she really had any control over or any input into. And the situation with Ashley's lawyer is just, it's a huge can of worms, and if you weren't around to see it happen in real time, it is a little bit confusing, and I will try my best to explain this. But essentially what happened is Ashley Smithline started to use the same lawyer that Esme Bianco was using, Ellwanger, and she ended up using him to file a lawsuit against Marilyn Manson, and that was kind of in the works for a while. And then at some point, their relationship started to break down. I don't really know how or why that happened. It's not really clear exactly when he was fired or when he left the case. There's a couple of different dates associated with that, and so I don't know, but at some point he stopped representing Ashley in court, which meant that because she had no other lawyer and wasn't doing anything for herself, she missed a bunch of deadlines and the case basically died in the water and nothing else really happened with that, and her case kind of just went by the wayside. But while all of this was happening, there were some screenshots that were being shared around, cropped, unverified screenshots of messages, so take them for what you will, a huge grain of salt, of course, but if you do think these are worth listening to, they do paint a different picture than the declaration does. Namely in the realm of whether or not she wanted to do anything related to the press, because in these messages, in these screenshots, it seems much more like it was her idea and she wanted to do a documentary. She even potentially had a deal with CNN for a documentary, and that she didn't want to do any press anymore. That was totally fine with Mr. Ellwanger. That was really long and short of it. And there were some other things in those messages as well, but really, for the most part, because Ellwanger was her former legal counsel, there's not really a lot he can do publicly in order to defend himself from these allegations or accusations. And so kind of whatever is in this declaration gets to be what's out there. And there's not really going to be a lot of counter-narrative unless this somehow ends up getting into court, which is very unlikely. We'll talk about that at the end of this video. So at this point, it's really hard to say what was going on in their relationship, but I don't fully believe that the declaration we're seeing now is the complete picture. But that is enough about Ellwanger, because there is another lawyer in this case we need to talk about. Good old Howard King, Marilyn Manson's head of legal representation. Manson's attorney, Howard King, tells Page Six that Smithline contacted him and his team of her own volition last week and has apologized to the singer. King also tells Page Six that Smithline has not been compensated for speaking in favor of his client and against Wood, which the model also affirms herself in her declaration. Based on when this story came out, last week would have meant February 13th or sometime around then. So keep a pin in that date. It'll be relevant again in a moment. But alongside this, there is a screenshot floating around. Again, it's cropped, unverified, all the usual stuff, that purports to show a conversation between Howard King and Ashley Morgan Smithline that paints a slightly different picture. I'm with Brian. Would you like to get on the phone with him now? He would like to talk. Closure is important to Brian, and he thinks you can help each other. And again, no date on that, so we can't really be sure of when that's from or if it's real or anything like that, but, possibly important if it can be verified at a later date. There was also an email chain, though, that was submitted to court between King and Ashley at the end of August 2022, in which King said that they would be unable to speak unless there was consent from her lawyer of record at the time, Ellwanger. And this is where things get interesting, because as part of her response to this declaration, Evan Rachel Wood filed a declaration of her own from somebody named Carl Nielsen, who was supposedly a friend of Ashley Morgan Smithline at the time. And this is what the declaration had to say. On June 8th, 2022, Ashley left me a voicemail in which he stated, "Don't repeat this to anyone. I swear to God, don't say this to anyone. And I'm not going to say it like over anything but speaking, but I did get a private message on my cellular telephone from Marilyn Manson's lawyer saying, quote, I was wondering if we could just talk. It was about a week ago. I have not called back, obviously. Obviously, it's very clear that a lawyer legally shouldn't and can't call me without calling my lawyer directly. He called. I'll play the message. It says Howard. It says, hi, Ashley, this is Howard King, or Harold King, or whatever his name is. I'd like to speak with you, just one-on-one, directly. No lawyers or something, he says. Just like people. And the only reason why he would be calling me at all a week ago and leaving a message is that he thinks I'm the weak link, and that he might want to settle with me to turn on the other girls and say that it's all like a ruse. A true and correct copy of Miss Smithline's June 8th, 2022 voicemail message will be lodged with the court as Exhibit 1 on a thumb drive containing 2 audio files. So if this voicemail message is accurate, this would mean that even before the February contact, even before the August email chain at the end of August, way back in June, Howard King was allegedly trying to contact Ashley outside of her legal counsel, going behind her legal counsel's back to talk to her just like a person. No big deal, no lawyers. God, I mean, I'm not an expert in what would get you in trouble as a lawyer, but that sounds like some sleazy entertainment lawyer finagling if I've ever heard of it. Like, oh, don't worry, it's totally like cool, man. We can totally just chat like people, you know, no big deal. Anyways, tell me about how you feel. You want to get Brian on the phone? I bet he'll apologize to you. Like, oh my lord, that sounds like it's completely unethical. But again, what do I know? Not an expert about all of this. But all of that being said, where does that leave us? What are my impressions from this declaration, and what do I get a sense of, like, what's going on here? And I really think, based on all of the evidence, the statements, all of the various accusations and allegations being made, the only thing we can really say for sure is that somebody is lying somewhere, and it's not clear to me exactly which things are lies and which things are not, at least when it comes to Ashley's statements, because I think it is pretty likely, based on Ashley's public harassment for several years at this point at a very high level, knowing she has existing mental health issues, and knowing that she has possibly experienced a high level of trauma, that she was more or less pushed into survival mode, where it would not be entirely uncommon for somebody who has experienced abuse to be looped back into their abuser's sphere of influence. It is not uncommon for abusers to get their abused victims back on side, back on their level, so to speak. And that is really concerning. And I think it's also this intersection of vulnerability here with this potential trauma, with the harassment, with everything else, that would make her the kind of person that would be more susceptible to pressure and manipulation. Be that from Marilyn Manson originally, be that from Marilyn Manson's team now, be that from Evan Rachel Wood and Ilma Gore. Clearly, I think this is a scenario where somebody is experiencing a lot of very intense mental things that would take even the healthiest person on the planet. They would take a really big mental toll on them. And I think we have to account for that. And I think there is enough public evidence that is easily available that contradicts enough parts of Ashley's new declaration to where I don't think you can really fully believe that either, at least without having some pretty significant questions. But for some reason, the more, again, pro-Manson side of the internet kind of just takes it like a total victory. No need to worry about it. This is complete proof that everything Evan Rachel Wood has ever said is a total lie. And I don't think we can really say that at this point. And if I'm being entirely honest, it kind of seems delusional to make the point that this is proof of like some kind of conspiracy theory and that no one else should ever be believed if they make allegations against Marilyn Manson. To my mind, all this really says is that it's a bit of a wash, right? Clearly, Ashley is lying somewhere at some point. Both things she has said so far cannot simultaneously be true, so clearly lies are coming from somewhere, and because we cannot really discern where the lies are coming from, at what time, about what things, we can't really take anything she says at face value, and it's probably better to just sort of like, count it as something that's not really credible in either direction, even if it favors your case or what you think is probably true in this scenario. I really just think that you can't rely on anything that's being said at this point in time. But also, even if Ashley felt pressured by Esme and Ilma and Evan, that doesn't mean that Marilyn Manson didn't abuse or harm anyone else. And in fact, something I really picked up on in the way this declaration was being written is there's not really a hint that Evan or Esme didn't think that they were abused. There's no sort of like, hey, we're gonna cackle over here and make up a complete story out of whole cloth, and we're gonna lie, we're gonna scheme, we're gonna get revenge on him because we're bitter exes. Like, that's not really the tone of the declaration. There's no sort of like, we're gonna make up random shit and just say wild stuff because we want to hurt Marilyn Manson and defame him. They seem to genuinely believe that they experienced abuse, that they wanted to help survivors remember what happened to them or feel strength in being able to talk about it, to the point that they believed that they were being surveilled by private detectives or private security. I can't remember which one of the two it says in the declaration, but that they were being surveilled and that they likely needed to have protection as a result of that. Like, that to me does not sound like people that think that they're, just making something up to get revenge because somebody deserves it. It sounds like they were legitimately concerned about being followed and that they actually believed that they were experiencing abuse at the hands of Marilyn Manson. And nothing in this declaration points to them knowingly lying, telling falsehoods, making up stories, and telling other people to make up falsehoods or to invent stories. That is not something that is outlined in this declaration. So I think what we've got at worst here, even if you do believe that she felt pressured, is that you have someone with known mental health issues that felt pressure in a social scenario to lie in order to fit in, essentially. But even if she was lying in order to fit in, she was extremely consistent about those lies being the truth to dozens of people for years, that any hint to anyone that I know of that she felt conflicted, that she wasn't really telling a true story. Like, it seemed pretty consistent for a very long scenario of time. But once again, even though Ashley's testimony at this point is unreliable and shouldn't really count for anything in either direction, that doesn't mean that everyone else involved was lying, wasn't abused, or that Marilyn Manson never abused anyone ever. But ultimately, none of this may end up mattering at all because of the way that Marilyn Manson went about getting this declaration and trying to shove it in at the 11th and a half hour before a hearing when they were supposed to have all of their evidence well submitted by this point. And actually, as I was writing this part of the script for the video, it came out that the judge denied their application to provide this declaration, and it cannot be used at the upcoming anti-SLAPP hearing next month. So this may end up only being a thing in the court of public opinion, but the court of public opinion does matter, especially with the level of scrutiny around this case and the level of notoriety it has. A lot of people are just going to see a headline that says, Evan Rachel Wood manipulated other accuser into lying, and take that as a fact at face value and not even look into it any farther, which is odd because a lot of people like that have been saying, well, I need to wait for the evidence to come out. I gotta wait until there's evidence. And then they just believe a declaration with no evidence attached to it at all, when they wouldn't believe declarations that were made similarly without any evidence attached previously. So make that make sense, because I really can't. But even now, at this point in time, there is still like almost a tit for tat going on in the media between Evan's team and now Ashley Morgan Smith line, after the declaration came out and then after Evan made her response and rebuttal to that declaration. Neither King nor Wood's attorney, Michael Kump, immediately replied to requests for comment. When reached for comment, Smithline told Rolling Stone, Evan's full of shit, that's my comment, before adding, she's saying anything she can to discredit me. And again, as I was finishing up this video, Ashley was on a YouTube live stream with some of the most notorious pro-Manson accounts on the internet, and the whole thing is just disturbing, and I don't fully know how to process it, actually. And it's weird because you can look at how she sounds right now in that live stream, and she's not even on camera, so who knows if it's actually her or not, but you can listen to that live stream, and then you can listen to her more recent previous public appearances, like on People magazine, and stuff from like over 10 years ago, and her voice and accent are entirely different, and I don't know what's going on there, but it sounds really strange.
Go. Hi, my name is Ashley Morgan. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I'm 175 centimeters, and I look forward to working overseas. I am American.
I thought it's like, it was bigger than a phone booth. You could like stretch out. It wasn't like cramped or anything, but you were definitely put in there like on timeout if he had people over and you were annoying him. Like
and like, sorry, I do want to address like the whole like American thing. Like,
Yeah.
when I was brought on, I was given a fucking script and I was told to be like Evan part 2, like child star, like mummy pushed me into the business really young, so like do American accent, be all American girl. I was basically like told to be Evan part 2. So yeah, I can do an American accent. I'm not like fine, but like,
And whatever is going on here, it is very clear that Ashley is very deeply hurt about what happened after she came out naming Marilyn Manson as her abuser, that the public backlash, that how the documentary went was not to her liking. And again, there's a lot of hurt going on here right now, and I think Ashley deserves a lot of compassion and a lot of empathy, because going off of the theory that she was actually still abused, getting roped back into your abuser's sphere of influence is a not uncommon occurrence and is a very dangerous place to be in, especially if they are making promises about, forgiveness and they want to apologize and have closure. You can do that when your relationship was just kind of like bad, incompatible, a little bit toxic, but full on emotional manipulation and abuse, which is what other people have alleged happened outside of Ashley, that is some very dangerous stuff to be dealing with. And if anything, this just really shows how going through a court system, publicly naming your abuser, is a horrifically destructive process. And I hope that no matter what else, Ashley gets help. She actually has real support and real help for whatever is going on in her life right now. Be that coming to terms with lying about people, be that coming to terms with talking to Marilyn Manson again, whatever is going on, Ashley, I genuinely hope if you're watching this, and you probably are, I want what is best for you. Most of us want what is best for you, and that is healing, owning up to mistakes, and hopefully not causing anyone else any destruction in this process. Yeah, I guess it's kind of it for my thoughts today. This is a very weird video to make. I had a lot of people that were like, you need to retract, you need to make an apology. Why have you? I had a lot of people that were like 24 hours after this declaration came out, they're like, why have you made a video about this yet? Like, it doesn't take me 4 days to make a fucking YouTube video. Like, sorry, between research, scripting, filming, editing, thumbnail, checking it, all of that stuff, like that takes more than 24 hours. My career, my job is not making on-demand Marilyn Manson videos. I cover things when I think there is enough and things are kind of like settled enough to talk about something, and I waited a couple days because I knew there was a hearing and I knew there was going to be a response to this declaration. So anyways, here we go. This is just a very bizarre scenario. Let me know what you all think in a comment down below, I guess. Anything else you want me to cover in regards to Marilyn Manson that I haven't yet, please be respectful, be kind, be decent freaking human beings. I hope you all can at least manage that. And yeah, that's going to be it for now, guys. Thank you so much for your support on these videos, and I wish you all the best. Stay safe out there, and I will talk to you all again soon. Bye!